right then. Where to begin? It feels necessary somehow to write this down, to get it out. Maybe it's the altitude. Maybe it's the isolation finally getting to me after only a few weeks. But things are happening up here. Things I can't explain. And I need someone to know. Just in case. My name is Arthur Penhaligon. Bit of a mouthful, I know. Sounds like something out of a dusty old novel, doesn't it? Until recently, I was crunching numbers for a soulless financial firm back in London. Soul-crushing, more like. After a particularly messy, let's call it a professional disagreement, I needed out. Far out. Saw an advert online, meteorological technician. High altitude observation post. Location listed simply as Mountain Range, North America. 6-month contract. Minimal human contact. Sounded like bliss. Honestly. A chance to escape the noise, the people, the whole bloody mess I'd made of things. Plus, I've always had a bit of a thing for weather. Clouds, storms, the sheer power of it all. Seemed almost romantic in a way. Swapped my suit for thermals and here I am. The final leg of the journey was a helicopter ride that rattled my teeth. Below us, the mountains stretched out like the fossilized spine of some colossal beast. All jagged peaks and shadowed valleys dusted with snow even in late summer. Then, the pilot pointed. A tiny speck, glinting metal against gray rock, perched precariously near a summit that looked like it scraped the roof of the world. That was it. Station 14. My new home. As the chopper pulled away, the noise faded incredibly quickly, swallowed by the vastness. And things silence. Not just quiet, but a deep, profound absence of sound that pressed in on my ears. It was the kind of silence that makes you realize how much noise you usually filter out. Down there, it's cars, sirens, chatter, the hum of the city. Up here, just the wind, thin and sharp, whistling past the structure. And beneath that, nothing. Utterly, completely isolated. Awe-inspiring, yes. But there was a prickle of something else too. A sudden, sharp awareness of just how alone I truly was. The station itself is functional. Built to withstand the elements, clearly. Metal walls, reinforced windows thick enough to stop a bullet. An airlock-style inner and outer door system. Inside, it's cramped but surprisingly well equipped. Banks of monitors, meteorological instruments humming quietly. A small galley kitchen. A bunk bed. A chemical toilet. Utilitarian, stark, everything bolted down. It smells faintly of ozone, disinfectant, and something else of a sort of dusty, stale scent, like old paper. The previous technician, a Mr. Abernathy, according to the handover notes, didn't leave much behind. A well-worn paperback copy of Moby, Dick with a cracked spine. A half-finished packet of digestive biscuits in a cupboard. Stale, I checked. And the station logbook. His entries are sparse, professional. Wind speed, barometric pressure, precipitation, cloud cover. All very neat, very by the book. A few entries mention equipment quirks. Power fluctuations during storms, standard stuff for a place like this. Nothing personal, nothing to suggest why he left mid-contract, forcing them to hire me in a hurry. My first few days fell into a routine. Wake before dawn, check the external sensors, Run diagnostics on the equipment. Record observations. Transmit the data packet to base via the satellite link. Brew tea. Thank God for small comforts. Eat, read. Stare out at the impossible panorama of rock and sky. Repeat. The silence remained the most prominent feature. It wasn't peaceful, not exactly. It felt heavy. Watchful. Sometimes, staring out of the thick windows at the endless expanse, I'd get the feeling of being observed. Not by anything specific, just by the mountain itself, by the sheer emptiness. I put it down to adjusting to the altitude, the solitude, nerves. Then, the oddities started. Small things. At first. Easily dismissible. About a week in, during a routine check, one of the external temperature sensors logged a reading of -70 degrees Celsius. Just for a second. Then it snapped back to the ambient temperature, around -5. Impossible. Even at this altitude, it shouldn't get that cold. Not instantaneously. I checked the logs, ran diagnostics, no faults found. Chalked it up to a sensor glitch, maybe ice interference. Made a note in the log. A few nights later, I was trying to sleep. The wind was picking up, howling around the station like a hungry animal. And beneath the howl, I thought I heard something else. Indistinct. Almost like voices carried on the gale, whispering and murmuring just at the edge of hearing. I sat bolt upright. Heart pounding. Listened hard. Nothing but the wind. Just the wind playing tricks, the station groaning under the pressure. That's what I told myself. But the feeling of unease lingered. Then came the barometer. Every night at precisely 3:03 a.m., the digital readout would flicker erratically for about 10 seconds. Not a huge fluctuation, just a jittery, nonsensical dance before settling back down. I checked Abernathy's log again. Scanned back months. Found one entry. 3:03. Barometer acting up again. Atmospheric anomaly or faulty sensor. Recalibrated. Pressure stable otherwise. He dismissed it too. But it happened again the next night. And the next 3:03 a.m. Why that specific time? It felt deliberate. Wrong. My attempts at rationalization started feeling thin. Altitude. Sickness doesn't make instruments behave like that. Equipment glitches don't usually keep such a precise schedule. Last night was worse. The wind was relatively calm. A low moan rather than a shriek. I was making my final log entry before turning in, and I heard it again. Not the indistinct murmuring this time. Clearer. Closer. Right outside the main door. It sounded, just for a fraction of a second, like something was whistling. A tuneless, breathy whistle that seemed to snag on the wind before being snatched away. My blood ran cold. I froze, listening with every fiber of my being. Silence. Just the low hum of the station around me. No footsteps on the metal grating outside. Nothing. I didn't sleep much after that. This morning, feeling jumpy and sleep deprived, I decided to double-check the primary satellite communication array. It's housed in a small dome on the roof, accessed via a ladder in the main equipment room. Everything looked fine, connections secure, diagnostics green. But as I was closing the access panel, something caught my eye. Tucked behind a bundle of cables, almost hidden from view, was a small, folded piece of paper. not standard issue. Looked like a page torn from a notebook. My fingers trembled slightly as I unfolded it. It was a Bernathy's handwriting. Spiky, hurried, unlike the neat script in the logbook. Just one sentence, scrawled in blue biro. If the wind sounds like it's singing, lock the inner door and don't check the barometer. A singing. What the hell does that mean? And why not check the barometer? Especially at 303. I'm sitting here now, the note on the console in front of me. The silence feels different today. Not just empty, but waiting. The sun is starting to dip below the peaks, painting the sky in brutal colors. Another long night is coming, and I'm starting to feel properly, genuinely afraid. The note. A Bernathy's hurried scrawl felt like a brand on my mind. If the wind sounds like it's singing, lock the inner door and don't check the barometer. Singing. What in God's name did that mean? Wind howls, it shrieks, it moans, it whistlers but singing. The word itself felt wrong, unnatural in this context. And the instruction, lock the inner door. The heavy, insulated steel door that separates the main station from the small airlock vestibule. Why? What was he trying to keep out? Or perhaps keep in? And the barometer. Don't check it. Specifically, don't check it when the wind sings. My mind immediately flashed to the 303 am anomaly. The precise, nightly flicker. Was that connected? Was the singing wind the trigger, the precursor to whatever happened on that instrument display? A Bernathy's own log mentioned the barometer glitch at 3:03 am, dismissed it as an anomaly or faulty sensor. But this felt different. This felt like a warning born of terror, not technical curiosity. I spent the rest of that day in a state of heightened anxiety, jumping at every creak of the station settling, every gust of wind rattling the antenna array on the roof. I read a Bernathy's logbook cover to cover, searching for any other hint, any coded message, any deviation from the dry, factual entries. Nothing. Just wind speeds, temperatures, dutiful observations. It was maddening. It was like reading the diary of a man meticulously, documenting the wallpaper pattern while his house burns down around him. Did he write that note after his last log entry? Did he flee immediately afterwards? Why not mention the singing wind in the official log? Was he afraid someone else would read it? Afraid of sounding insane? As dusk bled into true night, the temperature plummeted. The heating system kicked in. A low hum beneath the ever-present wind. I made myself eat another packet of rehydrated something or other that tasted vaguely of cardboard and despair, but my stomach churned. Every shadow seemed deeper, every flicker of the monitor lights more pronounced. I kept glancing at the barometer display, its steady green digits a silent, ticking clock counting down to 303 am. The wind picked up steadily after midnight. It wasn't just howling anymore. It was developing a strange, multi-tonal quality. Higher notes weaving through the deeper moans, creating a discordant, almost harmonic effect. It wasn't music, not in any conventional sense. But singing? Maybe. It was a high-then sound, almost like 1,000 off-key flutes playing different, mournful tunes all at once, carried on the gale. It scraped at the nerves, unsettling and deeply, profoundly wrong. It wasn't just the station groaning. This sound felt like it originated out there, in the vast, freezing darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. This had to be it. The singing wind. I looked at the clock. 2:48 a.m. A Bernathy's warning screamed in my head. Lock the inner door. I scrambled over to the heavy steel door, separating the main living or work area from the small airlock. My hands were shaking as I threw the heavy bolts. 4 thick steel pins slid into their reinforced sockets with a series of solid, echoing things. The sound was momentarily reassuring, a physical barrier against it, whatever this was. But it also felt like sealing myself inside a tomb. Don't check the barometer. This was harder. Curiosity is a powerful, insidious thing. What happened at 3:03 a.m.? What was so important, so dangerous, about seeing that reading during the singing wind? Was it just the erratic flicker I'd already observed, or something more? Did the reading itself do something, or reveal something? I paced the small confines of the station, the singing wind a constant, unnerving presence outside. It seemed to press against the walls, seeking entry. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my boots. I tried distracting myself. Checked the other instruments, temperature steady. And normal. External cameras showing nothing but swirling snow and darkness. Satellite link, holding firm. Everything seemed normal, except for that awful, pervasive sound and the frantic warning rattling in my brain. 2:59 a.m. My eyes were glued to the clock, then flickered involuntarily to the barometer. Steady. Normal atmospheric pressure for this altitude. 3,000 a.m. The singing seemed to intensify, the high notes becoming sharper, more piercing. It felt like it was drilling into my skull. 301 a.m. I backed away from the instrument panel, forcing myself to look towards the bunk beds, the galley, anywhere but the barometer. My breathing was shallow, ragged. 3:02 a.m. Sweat prickled my forehead despite the chill in the station. Every instinct screamed at me to look, to know. What was a Bernathy so afraid of? What could possibly happen? It's just numbers on a screen, 3:03 a.m. I couldn't help it. My gaze snapped back to the barometer display, just as the digits began to change. It wasn't the erratic flicker I'd seen before. The numbers, they started dropping, plummeting, far faster, far lower than any natural weather event could possibly explain. 950, 900,000 BB. 8,000 B. It was like the station had suddenly been transported to the heart of a Category 5 hurricane. But the wind outside, while loud and singing, wasn't that strong. It was impossible. Then, as it passed 7,000 B, the digits flickered, dissolved into meaningless static for a bare second, and then reformed. They didn't show a number. For perhaps 3 seconds, maybe 4, the display read HEA SUS. Then, just as quickly, the reading snapped back to the normal ambient pressure, steady and green, as if nothing had happened. The singing wind outside seemed to lessen slightly, the piercing high notes receding back into the general howl. I stared, frozen. Hears us. What the hell did that mean? Who hears us? Hears us doing what? Breathing. Existing. Was the barometer not measuring pressure at all during those moments? Was it receiving something? A message? My mind reeled. This wasn't an equipment malfunction. This wasn't altitude sickness. This was something else. Something intelligent. Something aware. The cold dread that had been simmering within me turned into icy, paralyzing terror. Abernathy hadn't been warning me about seeing a faulty reading. He was warning me about what the reading implied. That something out there, something tied to that impossible pressure drop. And the singing wind was listening. I stayed huddled near the center of the room for the rest of the night. The locked inner door, feeling pitifully inadequate. Sleep was impossible. Every gust of wind made me flinch. Was it still listening? Did it know I'd looked? When dawn finally broke, painting the peaks in pale, watery light, the relief was immense but short-lived. The fear remained, a cold knot in my gut. I forced myself to unbolt the inner door, peering into the small airlock vestibule. Empty. Normal. Then I looked out the thick window of the outer door, and I saw them. Footprints, not human footprints, not animal tracks I recognized. They were large, disturbingly so, and seemed wrong. Three-toed, perhaps. Deeply impressed in the fresh layer of snow that had fallen overnight. Leading away from the outer door, towards the precipitous drop, off just beyond the station's small, railed platform. As if something had been standing right outside the door, listening during the night. They hadn't been there yesterday. I would have noticed. The singing wind was gone, replaced by the usual, mournful howl. The barometer read steady. But Abernathy's note and the impossible message on the display burned in my memory. Here's us. Something is out here. And I think it knows I'm here now. I really wish I hadn't looked at the barometer. The footprints. They were burned into my retinas long after I'd stumbled back from the outer door's reinforced window. 3 toes. Deep impressions, unnaturally large. Leading away from my only exit and vanishing towards the sheer drop. Just meters beyond the station's small, graded platform. The snow around them was otherwise pristine, untouched save for the swirling patterns left by the wind. No drag marks, no sign of struggle, just steps. As if something had simply stood there, perhaps leaning against the cold metal, listening to the frantic thumping of my heart through the walls, before calmly walking away and stepping off in the abyss. My breath hitched in my throat, fogging the thick glass. Here's us. The message from the barometer echoed in the terrified silence of my mind. It hadn't just heard me, it had been right there. Close enough to touch the door. The cold dread from the night solidified in something sharp and brittle, pure, unadulterated panic. I backed away from the door, stumbling over my own feet, soon discovered why. Eyes darting around the cramped confines of the station, as if expecting the walls themselves to peel back. Sanity. I clung to the concept like a drowning man to driftwood. There had to be an explanation. A known animal. No creature I knew of left tracks like that. Especially not at this altitude. Oh, Wolverine. Absurd. The prints were too large, the pattern all wrong. And why only lead away? Why not approach tracks? A prank. Utterly impossible. Who could have gotten up here past the sensors just to strange patterns in the snow outside my door in the dead of night, only to vanish without a trace? The helicopter was my only way up or down, and it wasn't due for weeks. Altitude sickness, hallucinations. Could I have imagined the footprints? But they had looked so real, so solid, so deeply pressed into the fresh snow. And it didn't explain the barometer, or Abernathy's note. My attempts at rationalization crumbled, leaving only the stark, terrifying reality: something unknown, something unnatural, was on this mountain with me, and it knew I was here. Driven by a desperate need for connection, for some semblance of normalcy, I lunged for the communications console. The satellite link indicator glowed a steady green. Stable. I opened the comms program, fingers hovering over the keys. What could I even say? Hello base, Arthur here. Bit of a strange night. Wind sounded like it was singing. A barometer briefly displayed cryptic messages, and I think a three-toed entity was listening at my door. Please advise. They'd pull me out, all right. Straight into a psychiatric evaluation. Abernathy hadn't mentioned it in the official log, and maybe he had good reason. Fear of ridicule, or fear of making it real. I typed out the standard daily report: weather data. System status normal, my hands shaking so badly I kept hitting the wrong keys. Sent. The confirmation ping felt hollow, meaningless. I needed more information. Abernathy. He knew something. He had to know more than what was in that single terrified note. I grabbed the logbook again, flipping through the pages with frantic energy. His neat, precise entries mocked me. Wind speed, pressure, cloud cover. Day after day. Utterly mundane. Until the last week before his abrupt departure. I hadn't noticed it before, lost in the technical data. But now, fueled by adrenaline and fear, I saw it. The handwriting, while still neat, grew subtly tighter. The entries became shorter, more clipped. There was a 2-day gap where there were no entries, at all highly unusual. Then, the final entry, perfectly normal, followed big nothing. He was scheduled for another 3 months. What happened in those 2 missing days? What pushed him from meticulous record keeper to scribbling a cryptic warning and fleeing? Did the singing wind visit him? Did he see the footprints? Did he look at the barometer? The rest of the day passed in a blur of hypervigilance. Every creak of the station expanding in the weak sunlight, every gust of wind, every hum of the equipment sent jolts of adrenaline through me. I kept peering out the window at the spot where the footprints had been. The wind was gradually smoothing the snow, erasing the evidence, but the image was seared into my memory. I checked the external camera feeds obsessively. They covered the main approaches, the sensor arrays, but frustratingly, not the area directly in front of the outer door. Just swirling snow, jagged rocks, and the terrifyingly empty sky. As evening approached, the temperature dropped again. The silence returned, heavy and expectant. I forced myself to eat, the tasteless nutrient paste sticking in my throat. Sleep seemed like an impossible luxury. My small sanctuary felt more like a cage, a flimsy metal box perched on the edge of a hostile, alien world. The isolation pressed in, no longer a welcome respite, but a suffocating blanket of vulnerability. Then, a new sound. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the station settling. It was scratching. Faint, but unmistakable. Coming from the direction of the small ventilation shaft, near the ceiling in the corner of the main room. Scritch, scritch, scritch up. Pausing scritch. My blood turned to ice water. It sounded small, like claws, or long fingernails. On metal, inside the vent, I froze, straining to hear over the pounding of my own blood in my ears. Was it just ice in the ducts? A loose wire vibrating. It stopped. Silence. Then, scritch, scratch. Closer this time. Or just my imagination amplifying the sound. I grabbed the heavy-duty torch from the emergency kit, its beam cutting through the dim station light. I pointed it towards the vent grill, half expecting to see gleaming eyes staring back. Nothing. Just the dark metal slats. The scratching stopped again. Was it inside? Had something gotten inside? My gaze swept the room, the bolted-down furniture, the humming equipment racks, the sealed windows. How? The airlock. The vents. Was it small enough to squeeze through? The image of something small and sharp, clawed skittering through the station's hidden spaces, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Midnight came and went. The scratching didn't return, but the silence it left behind was somehow worse, filled with imagined rustles and phantom movements. My nerves were frayed beyond measure. I found myself talking to myself, muttering reassurances that sounded pathetic even to my own ears. It's just the wind, Arthur. Just the building settling. Grip, man. Get it then. The wind began to rise again. And with it, that awful, multi-toned keening. The singing wind. It started softer this time, a low, mournful chorus weaving through the gusts. My eyes snapped to the clock. 2:30 a.m. A Bernathy's warning. If the wind sounds like it's singing, lock the inner door and don't check the barometer. I scrambled to the inner door, throwing the bolts again. Thunk. 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 Sealed in. Or sealed with something if the scratching had been real. The thought was horrifying. The singing intensified. Pressing against the station, vibrating through the floor. And the terrible compulsion returned, the need to know. What would the barometer say this time? Would it be HRs, US? Again. Or something else, something worse. I paced like a caged animal, forcing myself away from the instrument panel. Don't look. A Bernathy warned you. He fled because of this. Don't make the same mistake. Remember the footprints. Remember the scratching. Don't look. 3,000 a.m. The singing reached a fever pitch, an unholy symphony that seemed to claw at the very foundations of reality. 3:01 a.m. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside my head, inside my bones. 3:02 a.m. My gaze flickered towards the console against my will. The barometer's green digits glowed innocently. Steady. Normal. 303 a.m. I didn't look. I swear I didn't look. I turned my back, facing the bolted inner door, focusing on the cold steel, breathing hard, resisting the urge. But then a flicker of movement on the main monitor screen, reflected faintly in the dark window opposite. Not the barometer. It was the feed from external camera 3. The one pointing down the narrow access path towards the ridge. Amidst the swirling snow, barely visible, something was moving. Tall, impossibly thin. Its limbs seemed too long, bending at unnatural angles as it shambled towards the station. It wasn't walking like a human, more like a broken marionette, jerking its way forward against the wind. Its head lolled on a thin neck, and though the resolution was poor and distorted by the snow, I could have sworn, just for a second before it lurched out of framing, that had no face, just smooth, pale skin. And it was coming closer. My heart seized. The image on the monitor, grainy, distorted by wind-whipped snow, was the stuff of primal nightmares. Tall, skeletal, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait that defied the howling gale. The faceless head lolled sickeningly. It wasn't just a figure. It felt like the figure, the source, the reason for the singing wind. The impossible barometer readings, Abernathy's terror, the footprints. And it was coming here. Coming for me. I stumbled back from the console, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. My eyes flickered between the monitor feed showing the approaching horror and the heavy, bolted inner door. Locked. Secure. But suddenly, that steel felt terrifyingly thin. The singing wind outside reached a crescendo, a deafening, multi-layered shriek that seemed to vibrate not just the station, but my very bones. It felt less like weather, and more like a conscious, malevolent force, welcoming its arrival. Then, the scratching started again, not from the vent this time, from the inner door. Scritch. Scritch. Right against the steel. On the other side, in the tiny airlock vestibule I had locked myself out of. My blood ran cold. It hadn't been just in the vents. Had it been in the airlock all along? Since when? Since I went out to check the footprints this morning. Did it slip in then? Or had it been hiding there longer? The thought that I had potentially locked myself in with something was far more terrifying than the figure approaching outside. On the monitor. Why? The faceless thing drew closer, its shambling gait horribly steady against the blizzard. It reached the edge of the small metal platform outside the main door and stopped. It didn't try the handle. It didn't bang or claw at the outer door. It just stood there, motionless in the swirling snow. Its featureless head tilted slightly, almost as if it were listening, or waiting, or watching me through the camera. The scratching on the inner door intensified. Scritch SRP. Thump, scritch. Faster now, more frantic, desperate, like something small and sharp and furious, trapped in the tiny space between the inner and outer doors. Was it trying to get out? Or trying to get in? A horrible realization dawned, cold and sharp. Abernathy's note. If the wind sounds like it's singing, lock the inner door. He hadn't been warning me to lock something out. He'd been warning me to lock something in. In the airlock, away from the main station, away from him, and I'd done it. Twice now. But maybe the first time I locked it, after hearing the whistling, whatever was inside the airlock stayed inside. But the scratching had it been trying to get out then. And this morning, when I saw the footprints and unbolted the door, did I let it into the main station? Was the scratching I heard earlier inside the vents inside the walls with me. And now it was trapped between the inner door and whatever that thing was outside. Here's us. The barometer's message flashed in my mind. It wasn't just the thing outside. It was both of them. They were aware of each other. Aware of me. Was this some kind of horrific symbiosis? The scratching on the inner door turned into frantic banging. Small, hard impacts, over and over, against the reinforced steel. Thump. Thump, thump. Simultaneously, on the monitor, the faceless figure outside slowly raised one impossibly long, thin arm and pointed directly at the camera. At me. It held the pose for a long, terrifying moment. A silent accusation or instruction. Before letting the arm drop back to its side, the banging on the inner door became ever more violent. Bang. Bang. The steel shuddered with each impact. It sounded less like small claws now, and more like fists, or something heavy being slammed against the metal. Panic clawed its way up my throat, raw and acidic. I backed away further, pressing myself against the cold metal wall of the station's galley area. Eyes wide with terror, darting between the monitor and the vibrating inner door. The lights flickered, once, twice, then went out, plunging darkness. Absolute, except for the faint emergency power. LEDs on the equipment racks and the hellish, swirling white noise on the now useless monitor screen where the faceless figure had been. The singing wind outside seemed to intensify, howling with triumphant glee, and the banging on the inner door became a frenzy, a deafening, rhythmic assault. Bang! 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 I fumbled for the heavy torch, my fingers clumsy with fear. Found it. Switched it on. The beam cut a shaky path through the oppressive darkness, landing on the inner door. It was visibly buckling outwards in the center, the steel groaning under the relentless impacts from the other side. Whatever was in the airlock wanted in. Now, don't check the barometer. Abernathy's final warning. Why? What did it show when this happened? When they were both here, one outside, one trying to break in. What impossible reading, what terrifying message would it display now? Some final, awful truth. The beam of my torch caught something on the floor near the door. A glint of metal. I cautiously moved closer. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, half hidden under the edge of the console. Not mine. Must have been Abernathy's. Had it fallen out during his panic departure? I picked it up. It sprang open in my trembling hand. Inside, there wasn't a picture. Just a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper, even smaller than the note I'd found by the satellite array. My fingers shook so badly I almost dropped it. Carefully, I unfolded it. More of Abernathy's spiky handwriting. It mimics. It learns. Don't let it hear your voice. Don't let it see your face. Came through the sample's hatch. God forgive me. The sample's hatch. A small, rarely used port in the airlock for collecting air samples. Barely large enough for a man's arm. Had something crawled through. Something small and adaptable. Something that could mimic. Mimic what? Voices. Shapes. The scratching, the banging, bang. A bang. A deafening crack echoed through the station as one of the heavy bolts, holding the inner door, shot out of its socket. ricocheting off the far wall. Sparks flew. The door buckled further, a visible gap appearing at the top. A low guttural hissing sound seeped through the gap, cutting through the howl of the wind. My torch beam wavered, dancing across the distorted metal. Another bolt groaned under the strain. It wouldn't hold much longer. Abernathy hadn't just fled the mountain. He'd fled this. The thing he'd accidentally let inside. The thing that learned. The thing that was now trying to get to me. And the faceless sentinel outside was it the shepherd? The master? Or just another part of the same nightmare? I backed away, the locket falling from my numbed fingers, skittering across the floor. Trapped. The faceless thing outside, the mimicking thing trying to break in. The singing wind screamed its madness, and the station felt like a tin can about to be ripped open. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic drumbeat against the cacophony. Another bolt snapped. The gap widened. A sliver of utter darkness peered through from the airlock. Colder than the mountain. Air. The hissing intensified, coalescing into something that sounded almost like distorted laughter. The torch beam shook violently in my hand. I couldn't scream, move. All I could do was watch the door, watch the darkness within the gap, and listen to the approaching end. The last thought that flashed through my mind, stark and terrifying, Abernathy didn't make it. He didn't escape. He just left the door open for the next pour sod. For me, the final bolt gave way with a screech of tortured metal. The inner door flew inwards,